My name is Isabella, 29 years old, and the night my sister shoved me off the balcony for Grandma's $1 million inheritance ring was the night I stopped pretending that family loyalty could excuse brutality. We were all gathered inside Eleanor Johnson's mansion, a house of velvet curtains and marble floors, where grief and greed hung heavier than the chandeliers above us. The funeral had ended hours earlier, but whispers of the will lingered sharp as knives. When the lawyer's voice declared that the diamond ring worth $1 million would belong to me, not Clarissa, I felt every eye slice across my skin. My younger sister's face convulsed like a mask cracking her perfect smile, melting into hatred so raw it made my stomach lurch. Clarissa had always been the golden child, pampered and protected, the one my parents described as delicate and sensitive, while I was branded strong and self-sufficient, the one who needed nothing. But in that moment, standing before dozens of relatives, she was not delicate at all. She was a predator. She cried, of course, the kind of staged sobs that drew people to her side, patting her shoulders, whispering sympathy while I stood isolated, shamed for receiving something I hadn't even asked for. My mother glared as though I had cheated her favorite child, and my father muttered that jewels were wasted on a girl like me. By the time darkness fell and wine blurred reason, I felt the storm circling. Clarissa cornered me on the second-floor balcony, the night air heavy with the smell of wet stone and roses from the garden below. Music pulsed faintly from inside, laughter disguising the tension, but when she leaned in close, her eyes glittered like a predator's in torchlight. She accused me of manipulating Grandma, of stealing what was hers, of always trying to humiliate her. Her nails dug into my wrist, and when I whispered for her to let go, she smiled a smile so chilling it burned into my memory because it was the smile of someone who had already decided what would happen next. Then her hands hit my chest, both of them hard and sudden. I felt the world tilt, the railing vanish, and for one split-second time, fractured. I saw the chandelier above shimmer like frozen light. I saw the horrified faces of cousins in the corner of my vision, and I heard Clarissa's breathless little laugh. Not a scream of fear, not a gasp of shock, but a laugh of triumph as gravity tore me away from her. The stone courtyard rushed up, merciless and final. I thought of Grandma, of all the times she held my hand and whispered that I was stronger than they knew, and then impact shattered me. My skull rang, my arm snapped pain, detonated through my body like fire. I tasted blood thick and metallic, and I couldn't breathe. The gasps and shouts around me blurred, but one sound cut through higher and shriller than all the rest, Clarissa's voice. She was wailing. She slipped. I tried to grab her. She slipped, words spilling from her mouth like poison rehearsed. My mother echoed instantly. Yes, she lost her balance, and my father growled. Stop blaming Clarissa. She was only trying to help. My vision swam, but even through the haze, I saw Clarissa collapse to her knees, pressing fake tears to her face, but not before her lips curled again in that secret victorious smirk meant only for me. Lying broken on the tiles, I realized I wasn't just fighting to breathe. I was fighting to exist, because if they succeeded with their lies, my truth would be erased forever. And in that moment, with my blood soaking into the cold stone, I made a vow stronger than any prayer I would survive, and I would drag the truth into the light, even if it meant tearing my family apart in front of the world. Before that night on the balcony, my life had already been shaped by years of silent bruises not on my skin but on my spirit, carved by the relentless favoritism that ruled my family like an unspoken law. My father, Martin, a tall man with a voice like a hammer striking steel, believed discipline was strength, and my mother, Diana, soft-spoken to outsiders, but razor-sharp at home, believed her mission was to protect Clarissa, her delicate porcelain doll of a younger daughter, at all costs. From the moment Clarissa was born 2 years after me, it was as though the sun had shifted in our household, its rays pouring only on her crib, leaving me in perpetual shadow. I remember being 6 years old, standing in the kitchen in my yellow pajamas, clutching the coloring book I had filled with careful drawings. I ran to my mother with excitement, but before she could glance at my work, Clarissa toddled in with a messy scribble on a scrap of paper. My mother clapped, gasped, and praised her as though she had painted the Sistine Chapel. then told me calmly that I was old enough not to need constant attention. That pattern burned itself into my childhood. When Clarissa threw tantrums in toy stores screaming until she was red in the face, she would be carried out with a new doll or dress while I stood beside her empty-handed, told to be patient and proud of being the strong one. At 10 years old, I remember scoring the highest mark in my class spelling competition, but no one came to watch me. That same week, Clarissa won a participation ribbon in gymnastics, and my parents took her out for ice cream, placing her ribbon on the refrigerator like it was Olympic gold. By the time I was 12, I had stopped bringing my achievements to their attention. Why show them medals that would never make their eyes shine the way Clarissa's tears did? My father often said, "Isabella can take care of herself. Clarissa needs us more." At family dinners, he would bark at me to fetch water, clear dishes, help mother in the kitchen, while Clarissa sat with her chin propped on her hands, sighing dramatically until someone cut her meat for her. The favoritism hardened into open injustice when we became teenagers. At 16, Clarissa demanded a car, and my parents gifted her a shiny silver convertible with a red ribbon tied on the hood, cheering as she shrieked with joy. I was told to be happy for her. When I asked about my own car, I was told that if I really wanted one, I could get a job. And I did. I bagged groceries every afternoon, saving coins in a jar until I bought myself a rusty Honda Civic that stalled in the rain. Clarissa laughed when she saw it, calling it a trash can on wheels, and my parents chuckled along. At the time, I thought maybe if I just worked harder, studied more, they would notice me, but the more capable I became, the more invisible I felt. Gaslighting became the language of our home. Whenever I dared to point out the unfairness, my mother would sigh and say, "You're overreacting, Isabella. You're so independent, you don't need us the way Clarissa does." My father would snap, "Stop being dramatic. Stop making everything about you." They made me doubt my own reality. Was I selfish for wanting the same love, the same praise, the same protection? Was I cruel for noticing that everything I did was dismissed, while everything Clarissa did was amplified? My grandmother Eleanor was the only one who ever broke the cycle. She saw through Clarissa's fake tears, saw the sharpness in my parents' dismissals, and when I was 15, she pulled me aside after a family dinner and pressed an old locket into my hand. "You have a light inside you, Isabella," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "They may not see it, but I do. One day you will get what you deserve." I held on to those words like a lifeline. Through high school, I pushed myself, joined advanced classes, took internships, applied for scholarships because I knew if I wanted a future, it would be through my own strength. I got into a top university with a full scholarship, studied computer engineering, while Clarissa bounced between majors, spending her nights at parties and her days in bed. Even then, my parents covered for her, paying her rent, praising her every half step. When I landed my first job at a tech company in Chicago, working long hours to prove myself, my parents barely acknowledged it. At Thanksgiving, I tried to share that I had been promoted to team lead at 26, but the moment I opened my mouth, Clarissa interrupted to talk about her new hairstyle, and the conversation shifted entirely to her beauty, her charm, her endless tales of boyfriends. My parents beamed at her, nodding, and when I fell silent, they did not even notice. The pain of being erased was worse than loneliness. At least loneliness is honest. What I felt was like screaming underwater, the sound trapped in my own chest while everyone else laughed above the surface. And yet every holiday, every family gathering, I kept coming back, hoping that this time would be different, that this time someone would look at me and say, "We are proud." But it never came. Instead, it escalated. 2 years ago, when I was hospitalized with pneumonia, I called my mother to ask if Clarissa could bring soup. She said Clarissa was busy at a work happy hour and told me to order delivery instead. Months later, Clarissa broke up with a boyfriend and my parents demanded that I take her in. She crashed on my couch for weeks, invited friends over, left the apartment trashed, and when I complained, my father barked, "Stop being selfish, Isabella. Family comes first." Family came first, but only when it meant me sacrificing and Clarissa receiving. I became the invisible backbone, the one who fixed problems, paid bills, picked up pieces while she basked in endless indulgence. Looking back, I realize my family had already trained me to accept violence in quieter forms, the slap of words, the bruise of neglect, the fracture of constantly being told my needs were irrelevant. So when Clarissa's hands shoved me off that balcony, it was not the first time she had pushed me. It was simply the first time everyone else could see it. The weeks leading up to Grandma Eleanor's funeral felt like standing on thin ice, the kind that cracks without warning under too much weight, and when the day finally came, I knew before I even walked into the mansion that grief would be nothing compared to greed. Relatives from across the state swarmed the estate, some genuinely mourning others, already whispering about heirlooms and assets as though Grandma's body was just another obstacle between them and her fortune. For me, grief was real. Eleanor had been my only safe harbor, the only one who ever looked at me and saw more than a shadow to Clarissa's glow. Losing her was like losing proof that I mattered at all. Clarissa, on the other hand, treated the funeral like a stage performance. She wore a dramatic black dress cut low enough to invite whispers, dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief every few minutes, and sighed so loudly during the eulogies that heads turned to comfort her. My parents hovered near her like bodyguards whispering to guests about how sensitive she was, how this loss was hardest on her delicate heart. No one asked me how I was. When the lawyer gathered us in the study to read the will, the air was thick with perfume and tension, cousins leaning forward as if listening for a winning lottery number. Most of the estate was divided in equal portions, predictable and acceptable. But when the lawyer's voice announced that the diamond ring, valued at over $1 million, was being left specifically to me, the room froze. My heart jolted not with greed, but with shock. I had not expected anything, had not even dared hope, and yet here was a tangible symbol that Grandma had seen me, chosen me, validated me. The silence shattered with Clarissa's scream. She rose from her chair so fast it clattered backward, her face blotched red, her voice trembling with outrage as she cried that it was unfair that I had manipulated Grandma in her final days, that everyone knew I never wore jewelry and the ring would be wasted on me. My mother immediately wrapped her arm around Clarissa, murmuring agreement, telling the lawyer that surely it was a mistake that Clarissa had always been closest to Eleanor. My father's jaw tightened, and though he didn't shout in that moment, his eyes locked on me with disgust as if I had committed theft in front of them all. A wave of murmurs rippled through the relatives, some glancing at me with suspicion, others with pity. But no one defended me. The lawyer repeated firmly that the will was clear and legally binding. I sat in silence, the weight of the ring heavier than any diamond, heavier than guilt itself, because I knew this small piece of validation would unleash storms. Afterward, in the hallways, relatives approached me with fake smiles, saying things like, "Congratulations," in tones that dripped with envy. Clarissa avoided me all evening, except for the glares she shot across the room, daggers that promised this wasn't over. Later that night, while guests drifted toward wine and chatter, Clarissa staged her next act. She pulled me aside in front of our parents and accused me again, this time in hushed tones, sharpened with venom. "You never cared about her like I did," she hissed, her eyes wet but hard. "You tricked her. You stole from me." I tried to remind her that Eleanor had made her own choices, that it was not about money but about trust, but my words bounced off her armor of entitlement. My mother's voice cut in cold, as stone. "Isabella, just give her the ring." "Stop making this family suffer." My father added, "You think a trinket matters more than peace. Don't be selfish." Their gaslighting landed like a blow. For years, I had been accused of selfishness every time I wanted fairness, and here it was again, scripted as if they had rehearsed it. Clarissa began to cry loudly, collapsing into my mother's arms, her sobs echoing down the hallway, and once again, I was painted as the villain. That night in the guest room where I stayed, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, every memory of childhood favoritism replaying itself. The pattern was relentless. Clarissa's tantrums rewarded my efforts, ignored my resistance labeled cruelty. I should have expected it, but the clarity of Grandma's will had made me hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally take my side. Instead, it made me their enemy. The next day, tension poisoned every interaction. During breakfast, Clarissa deliberately spilled coffee on my dress and then gasped theatrically that it was my fault for bumping her. My father scolded me in front of cousins, telling me to be more careful while Clarissa was consoled and escorted to change clothes as if she were the victim. At lunch, I tried to talk to an aunt about Grandma's stories, but Clarissa interrupted loudly, reminding everyone that she had spent more weekends with Eleanor, that she was the favorite grandchild, that she deserved the ring. My mother nodded approvingly, adding that I had always been too busy with work to care for family. Each word chipped at me, each glance reminded me of my place in their narrative, the cold, selfish, undeserving daughter. The pressure built like a vice around my ribs. Guests, whispered, family members chose sides, but few dared speak against the golden child. Aunt Margaret, my father's older sister, gave me a long, searching look. At one point, her expression troubled, but she said nothing. That silence haunted me because silence was how Clarissa always won. By evening, after endless rounds of drinks and simmering resentment, the mansion's halls felt like a stage set for tragedy. I kept away from Clarissa, but she hunted me with her eyes, her smile twitching, her voice dripping with sarcasm whenever she addressed me. Enjoying your prize, she sneered once in front of cousins. My cheeks burned, but I said nothing, knowing any defense would be twisted. When night fell and the memorial turned into a party of murmurs and wine glasses clinking, Clarissa approached me on the balcony, her face half-shadowed, her tone sweet enough to rot teeth. That was when she pressed close, accused me again of betrayal, and everything spiraled toward the shove that would send me crashing onto the stone courtyard below. Looking back, the signs were everywhere, the gathering nothing more than a trap disguised as mourning. The buildup wasn't just hours long, it was decades in the making, every small cut of favoritism sharpening the knife that would eventually be plunged into my back. The night of the fall is burned into my mind like a scar that never fades. Every second stretched thin with terror and betrayal, because when Clarissa shoved me off that balcony, it was not a drunken mistake. It was the culmination of years of indulgence and cruelty condensing into one violent act meant to erase me completely. The balcony was crowded with murmurs from cousins smoking cigarettes, the glow of their lighters flickering against the dark, and I had stepped outside to breathe to escape the suffocating weight of Clarissa's glare. She followed me, her heels clicking like daggers on the marble floor, her perfume sharp and nauseating, and when she leaned close, her words were knives cutting straight into me. "That ring is mine," she hissed, her face so close I could see the mascara clumping at her lashes, her eyes fevered with hatred. I told her calmly, or as calmly as I could, while my chest pounded, that Grandma had made her choice, that it wasn't about money, but about trust. But she laughed a hollow, cruel sound. Trust. She was senile. You tricked her. You always make me look weak. Her nails dug into my wrist, and before I could pull free, she pushed a hard, deliberate shove that knocked the breath from my lungs. For a split second, the world slowed. The railing disappeared behind me. The night air rushed cold against my skin, and I saw her face above me. Not shocked, not horrified, but triumphant. She smiled, and I will never forget that smile, because it told me she wanted this. She had dreamed of this me, broken on the stones so she could claim the ring without resistance. Then gravity claimed me. I felt the ground rushing up the stars, spinning, and in that endless second, I thought of Grandma's voice telling me I was stronger than they knew, and I clung to that as the courtyard stones shattered into my body. Pain exploded. My arm snapped with a sickening crack. My skull slammed against stone, and a warm gush of blood spilled down my face. Screams erupted around me. Cousins dropped their cigarettes. Someone yelled for help, but the loudest sound was Clarissa's fake wail. She slipped. She slipped. I tried to catch her. She cried, her hands clutching the railing as though she had fought to save me. My parents rushed onto the balcony, their eyes darting from Clarissa's trembling act to my crumpled body below. And instead of horror at what she had done, they latched onto her lie with desperate eagerness. "Yes," she slipped. My mother shouted. Clarissa tried to save her. My father roared at the gathering crowd. "Stop blaming Clarissa. It was an accident. She's always so clumsy." Their voices layered the lie, thick enough to suffocate me more than the blood in my throat. I tried to speak, to say no, to scream the truth, but the pain silenced me. My voice trapped as paramedics were called and guests muttered uneasily, half believing the performance staged before their eyes. Through my haze of pain, I saw one figure not rushing to comfort Clarissa, not echoing the lie, but standing still in the shadows with a phone clutched tight Aunt Margaret. Her face was pale, her eyes locked on Clarissa, and though she said nothing in that moment, I prayed she had seen that she had captured what had truly happened. Meanwhile, Clarissa descended the staircase with exaggerated sobs, throwing herself beside me, clutching my hand with her cold fingers, and whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I tried to save you, Izzy. I tried." Her crocodile tears dripped onto my skin, her mascara smearing, but when she leaned close, her breath tickled my ear, and she whispered so low, only I could hear, "No one will believe you." Rage cut through the pain, but I was too weak to fight back strapped onto a stretcher, my blood staining the paramedics' gloves as they lifted me. My mother hovered above me, her face pinched, not with worry for me, but with fury that this scene might embarrass the family. "Don't you dare make this worse," she hissed. "Clarissa already feels guilty. Don't add to her suffering." My father followed close, barking at the crowd to step back, shielding Clarissa as if she were the victim. In the ambulance, as sirens wailed, I stared at the ceiling and realized that if I stayed silent, their story would win. I would become the clumsy daughter who slipped Clarissa, the tragic sister who tried to save me, and once again I would be erased. But this time, there were witnesses. This time, there was Margaret's pale face in the shadows, and I clung to that thread of hope, even as darkness pulled me under. In the hospital, the lies continued. Clarissa arrived with flowers, weeping dramatically, telling nurses how devastated she was, while my mother scolded me for being careless, reminding me to protect Clarissa's reputation. My father told the doctors it had been a simple fall, insisting there was no need for investigation. Every word was a noose tightening around my throat. But beneath it all, my vow burned stronger. I would not let them bury me in silence. The climax was not just the fall. It was the realization that survival alone was not enough. Survival had to be paired with truth dragged screaming into the light, because if I let their lies stand, I would spend the rest of my life broken twice, once in body, once in spirit. And so even with my arm in a cast and stitches across my scalp, I began planning, knowing that Clarissa's push had not just broken my bones, it had finally shattered the chains of my silence. Lying in that hospital bed with tubes in my arm and stitches tugging at my scalp, I realized survival was not enough. Because survival meant nothing if the truth remained buried under their lies. And my family was already hard at work, weaving the narrative that Clarissa had tried to save me, that I had simply lost my balance, that I was clumsy and ungrateful, and now threatening to tear the family apart with accusations. My mother sat by my bed with folded arms, her expression stiff, telling me that for the good of the family, I needed to confirm to everyone that it was an accident, that Clarissa had only been trying to help me, and when I refused, she narrowed her eyes and said, "Why are you being so cruel, Isabella? Can't you see your sister is traumatized by this? She cries herself to sleep, thinking about how she failed to catch you." The audacity of that lie made my chest burn, but I was too weak to fight her in that moment, too foggy with medication to scream the truth. So I let her words hang in the sterile air, promising myself I would answer later with action, not tears. My father came next, leaning over me with that stern scowl he reserved for moments when he wanted to remind me I was the problem. "You will not ruin your sister's life over a misstep," he growled. "You want everyone to know you're petty enough to drag family into scandal over a fall? Grow up." Then he shoved a waiver toward me, some ridiculous paper meant to absolve Clarissa of any responsibility, and when I pushed it away with my good hand, he cursed under his breath, muttering about how selfish I had always been. Clarissa herself made her entrance like a queen, mourning her subject arms full of flowers, mascara perfectly streaked down her cheeks, collapsing dramatically in a chair beside me and grabbing my hand. She sobbed loudly for the nurse's benefit, repeating, "I tried to save her. I tried over and over," and then leaned close to whisper, so only I could hear, "If you tell them anything else, no one will believe you. They never believe you, Isabella." And the worst part was that she was right. My parents never had my relatives, never had, and the weight of decades of gaslighting pressed down on me until I felt suffocated, like even my broken body would not be enough proof against her lies. But then came Margaret. My aunt entered the room quietly 2 days later when my parents and Clarissa had gone to fetch food, and she sat beside me with eyes that were both frightened and determined. For a moment, she said nothing, only held my hand, and then she whispered, "I saw what happened." My breath caught the words like oxygen after drowning. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, showing me the screen, and there it was. Shaky but undeniable footage of Clarissa shoving me with both hands, her face twisted with hatred, her smirk of satisfaction before she began to wail. My throat closed with a sob I didn't mean to let out because for the first time in my life, I had proof I had something that could not be erased with my parents' voices or Clarissa's tears. Margaret squeezed my hand and said I didn't know if I should say anything, but after seeing how they are twisting it, I can't stay silent. "You need to use this, Isabella. Promise me you will." In that moment, the vow I had made while bleeding on the stones solidified into steel. I would not be silenced. I would not let Clarissa walk away with her crown of lies. I would take this video, this undeniable truth, and I would use it to expose her no matter what it did to the family. I hired a lawyer the next week using money I had saved from years of careful budgeting, and though my parents screamed that I was betraying them, though they threatened to cut me off entirely, I felt something inside me shift, a strength I had buried under decades of gaslighting rising to the surface. Every word of theirs that had once made me doubt myself now fueled my resolve. When Clarissa came to the hospital again and tried to croon about how she forgave me for being dramatic, I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I'm pressing charges." The shock on her face was sweeter than any inheritance. The turning point wasn't just the moment I saw that video. It was the moment I decided to fight to stop begging for recognition and start demanding justice. For the first time, Clarissa's confidence faltered, and for the first time I felt like maybe I could win. The courtroom smelled of polish and fear, its wooden benches filled with relatives who had come not to support me, but to watch the spectacle, as though Clarissa's trial for attempted assault was another form of family entertainment. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my lawyer, my arm still weak in its brace, my body marked with scars from the fall, and my heart beating so hard I thought it might break my ribs. Across the aisle sat Clarissa, draped in a modest dress far plainer than her usual designer outfits. Her hair pulled back into a simple bun, her eyes red-rimmed as though she had spent every night crying. It was a performance and a good one. She clutched tissues, dabbed her cheeks, leaned against my mother for comfort, while my father sat stiff beside them, his jaw clenched in righteous fury aimed at me. Their narrative was simple and repeated like gospel. Isabella slipped, Clarissa tried to help. The tragedy was that a family had been torn apart by a misunderstanding. My lawyer whispered to me to stay calm, to let the evidence speak, but it was hard not to shake with rage as Clarissa took the stand first, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "I loved my sister," she said, eyes shining with fake sincerity. "And that night I tried to grab her when she stumbled, but she was too heavy and I couldn't stop her. I live with the guilt every day that I failed to save her." Gasps rippled through the relatives seated in the gallery heads, nodding as though she were a saint bearing undeserved blame. When the prosecutor asked if she had ever pushed me, she clasped her chest and cried, "Never, never. I would never hurt Isabella. She's my sister." My mother testified next, her voice sharp, declaring that I was prone to exaggeration, that I often twisted situations to make myself look like a victim, that Clarissa had always been fragile and I had always been jealous. My father followed, booming that I was trying to destroy the family for money, that I wanted to tarnish my sister's name over an accident. Each word felt like a slap, reopening wounds that had never healed, but I clenched my fists and stared straight ahead, knowing what was coming. When it was finally my turn, I stood slowly, my legs trembling but my voice steadier than I expected. I described the balcony, the argument, the shove, the pain, and then the lie that followed Clarissa's crocodile tears. I told them how for decades I had been erased, gaslighted, blamed, and how this time I refused to be silenced. My parents glared as though I had spat in their faces. Clarissa shook her head with mock sorrow, but then my lawyer called Margaret to the stand. The courtroom stilled as my aunt, normally quiet, walked forward clutching her phone. She testified simply, her voice shaking. I saw Clarissa push her. I filmed it. Murmurs erupted. My parents gasped. Clarissa went white. My lawyer approached the judge and submitted the video, and within seconds, the screen lit up. Grainy but clear, it showed Clarissa lunging forward, shoving me with both hands, my body toppling over the railing. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my mother's breath hitching my father muttering, "No, no, this can't," and Clarissa herself whispering, "That's not what happened," even as her own image betrayed her. The jury's faces hardened, the gasps of relatives turned into disgusted whispers, and the mask Clarissa had worn all her life cracked into dust. The prosecutor replayed the footage highlighting the smirk she gave before turning to wail, and I felt tears prick my eyes, not from pain, but from vindication, from the power of the truth finally shining where lies had always thrived. My lawyer rested her case with quiet confidence, while Clarissa's defense sputtered about misunderstandings, claiming the video was taken out of context, but the judge's expression was granite unmoved. When the verdict was read, time slowed. Guilty. Clarissa was convicted of assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation mandatory community service and ordered to pay damages. More importantly, she was stripped of her claim to any inheritance. Under the will, the judge declaring that someone who sought to harm another beneficiary could not profit from the estate. My parents erupted in outrage, my mother sobbing that her baby was being persecuted, my father shouting that I had ruined them, but no one listened. The gavel struck, the decision was final, and for the first time in my life, the scales of justice tipped in my favor. As Clarissa was let out, her face twisted with fury, she spat at me, hissing, "You'll regret this." But I didn't. Watching her stumble in handcuffs, her perfect image shattered. I felt something I had never allowed myself before triumph. It wasn't just about the ring or the money, it was about proving that the truth mattered, that I mattered. The courtroom emptied, relatives avoiding my eyes, ashamed of their silence, ashamed of siding with lies for so long. Only Margaret lingered, placing a hand on my shoulder and whispering, "You did it, Isabella. You broke their hold." And in that moment, battered and bruised but standing tall, I knew she was right. The twist wasn't just that I exposed Clarissa. It was that I exposed the rot at the core of my family and forced them to face the one thing they had always denied, that I was not invisible, not weak, and not willing to be erased ever again. After the verdict, the world outside the courthouse felt different, the air sharper, the sky brighter, as if for the first time in my life the universe acknowledged that I had been wronged and that wrong had been answered. But the aftermath was far from simple, because families like mine don't collapse quietly. They claw and bite, even in defeat. Clarissa returned home not to cheers of sympathy, but to whispers of shame. Neighbors who once adored her crossing the street to avoid eye contact, friends suddenly too busy to return calls, her social media once filled with curated glamour, now littered with comments calling her violent, spoiled, dangerous. The girl who had thrived on attention suddenly found herself starved of it, and from what I heard through relatives, she spent days locked in her room, screaming at my parents, blaming them for not protecting her. My parents themselves were fractured, my mother reduced to bitter tears whenever she spoke my name, insisting that I had betrayed the family, while my father grew quieter, the anger in him dimmed into a hard resignation. At gatherings, they no longer commanded respect, but endured sideways glances, whispered questions about how they could defend a daughter proven guilty on tape. For the first time in decades, they were the ones diminished, their authority cracked. As for me, I felt the weight lift. I moved back into my own apartment with a steadier stride. The cast gone, my body healing, but more importantly, my spirit finally free from the stranglehold of their lies. The ring, once the spark of chaos, I placed in a small safe deposit box, not to flaunt, but to preserve, because it was no longer just a jewel, but a symbol of Eleanor's faith in me, proof that at least one person in my bloodline had seen my worth. Friends who had once grown weary of hearing my stories of neglect now looked at me with pride, telling me I was brave, that I had finally broken the cycle. Margaret became closer to me than ever, her courage to stand up and show the video becoming the bridge to a bond I had never expected. We shared coffee every week, and she told me stories about Eleanor, about how she too had once felt overshadowed in her own life. and how watching me fight back gave her hope. The rest of the family avoided me at first, ashamed, uncomfortable, unwilling to confront what they had ignored, but slowly a few reached out. A cousin called to apologize for not speaking up. An uncle admitted he had always known something was wrong, but had been too cowardly to say it aloud. Their words didn't heal everything, but they mattered. They showed me that my truth had rippled outward. Clarissa's punishment was not just in the sentence handed down by the judge. It was in the collapse of the world she had built on manipulation. The probation and community service humiliated her. The whispers at every grocery store and cafe, cut deeper than prison bars, and the loss of inheritance meant that for the first time in her life, she had to rely on her own means. I almost pitied her, but then I remembered her smirk as she shoved me her hiss that no one would ever believe me, and pity turned back to resolve. I did not want revenge beyond what had been delivered. I wanted freedom, and I had it. The fallout for my parents was harsher than I expected. At church, they were no longer the respected couple, but the parents of a daughter convicted of assault, and the murmurs bruised them in ways my words never had. My father stopped calling me selfish, stopped calling me anything at all, until one day, months later, he phoned and asked quietly how my arm was healing. It wasn't an apology, but it was a crack in the wall, and perhaps someday it might widen. My mother still refused to see me. Her pride too wounded, her blindness too stubborn, and I accepted that maybe she never would. I no longer needed her validation. The resolution of this story was not in making them love me, but in realizing I could thrive without their love. I decorated my apartment with plants, filled it with light, invited friends over for dinners, where laughter was genuine and no one was erased. I traveled with my savings, took the trips I had once postponed for family obligations, hiked mountains, and stood at summits breathing air free of their shadows. And every time I glanced at the faint scar above my eyebrow or flexed the arm that had once been broken, I remembered not just the pain, but the strength it birthed. The resolution was not perfect harmony. It was clarity that family by blood can be poisonous, that loyalty must be earned, that love without respect is worthless. For the first time in my life, I no longer asked, "Am I enough for them?" Instead, I asked, "Are they enough for me?" And the answer was no. Standing here now, months after the trial, after the whispers have dulled into silence, and the scars on my skin have faded into pale reminders, I finally understand what healing means, and it is not the absence of pain, but the presence of truth. For so long, I carried the weight of being invisible, dismissed, gaslighted, blamed for things I never did, and every time I thought maybe if I worked harder or stayed quieter or proved myself more, they would see me. But the truth is, they never wanted to see me. They needed me silent so Clarissa could shine, and when silence wasn't enough, they needed me erased. That night on the balcony, when her hands shoved me into the dark and I fell with her laughter in my ears, I thought my story might end in broken bones and a shallow grave of lies. But instead, that night became my beginning because it forced me to choose between living in their narrative or writing my own. I chose myself. Healing has not been easy. There are days I still wake with the echo of falling, the snap of my arm, the sting of blood in my eyes. There are nights I hear my mother's voice calling me cruel, my father's voice calling me selfish, and Clarissa's hiss that no one would believe me. But then I remember the courtroom, the video on the screen, the gavel striking the faces, shifting from doubt to recognition, and I remember that truth is louder than lies if you refuse to let it be buried. I have learned that boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. I have learned that family is not defined by shared blood, but by shared respect. I have learned that choosing myself is not selfish, it is survival. And now, as I look forward, I carry these lessons like armor. I carry Eleanor's ring not as treasure, but as proof that someone believed in me, and I wear my scars as proof that I believed in myself. If you are listening to this, if you have ever been dismissed by those who should have loved you most, if you have ever been told that your pain was an exaggeration, or your worth was conditional, hear me now, you are not alone and you are not wrong. The way they treat you is not a reflection of your weakness, but of theirs. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be safe. You deserve justice, even if you have to drag it into the light by yourself. Sometimes the people who hurt us hide behind the word family, But blood is not an excuse for cruelty. Sometimes the hardest fight is the one we wage at the dinner table, in the living room, in the court of public opinion, but those battles matter because they carve space for us to breathe. So I ask you, what boundaries do you need to draw? What truths do you need to speak? What chains do you need to break? Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for them to change. Choose yourself now. If my story proves anything, it is that justice is possible, healing is possible, and freedom is possible when you stop begging to be believed and start demanding to be respected. Thank you for listening to me. And if this resonates, share your own story, because when we tell the truth out loud, we take back the power they tried to steal.